I am Jon Sicotte, executive editor of the Brewer Magazine. Welcome to another edition of the Brewer Magazine podcast. Be sure that you're liking and subscribing on YouTube or Spotify, or watching us along on Facebook as well. Of course, you can always go 24 hours a day for your brewer resources at brewermag.com. All right, well, every once in a while, we do like to dig into the archives. In February's 2021 issue of Brewer Magazine, it was called Looking Through the Haze, Old Nation Branches from New England IPA Strength. And I talked to one of the founders, Travis Fritts, who is a classically trained brewer and is hardcore in the belief that brewing is a trade and it should have that apprenticeship level. And he trained under Celis and different guys like that. He talks about this when I talked to him in October of 2020 in an empty tap room outside of Lansing, Michigan. Obviously a lot of stuff going on at the time. The tap room was shut down. So you'll hear some echoes because we're sitting in an empty tap room. You'll hear the phone ring because people are calling, asking if they can actually, come into the tap room, and everything was closed. It was a different time, obviously. So I kind of skipped through some of the interview where we were just talking about stuff that was going on during the pandemic. But I zeroed in on this segment where we talk about the importance of being classically trained, understanding the aspects of brewing and why it's so important, and how at that time the Old Nation Brewery was looking to branch out into lagers more, and why it was so important to be classically trained, to be able to make styles like this and have that background. It's a real insightful chance to talk with Travis Fritts, a wonderful brewer, someone who created a New England IPA style that's really popular in the Michigan area, and how he wanted to bring his consumer base into lagers.
And I don't know, it may be kind of a fool's errand, so we've got to be really cautious about how we roll out the whole idea, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because people can get information really quickly now, and they know when they're being jerked around, right? Mm-hmm. So, building a brand now is as much about how authentic you actually are, right? And if we weren't able to say, if Nate and I weren't able to say, Nate graduated from UC Davis and learned from, Belgian and English guys all over the country. I graduated from the VLB in Berlin at the Technical University there. And, I was an apprentice for some time of Pierre Celis's and John-Luc Suys and other, those are Belgian guys, but, other German brewers as well, and a great English brewer who's actually an American guy, but steeped in the English style, George Murphy. I want to share that stuff with folks. I mean, it sounds trite, you know what I mean? But I really do, right? Like, Belgian beer is a good example. And I talk to people about this a lot. I mean, I was 21 years old. Pierre and John-Luc preferred to speak French, which is why I got the job working for them, right? I just come back from Germany. John-Luc had gone to the VLB. John-Luc Suys did all the Unibrew beers. So like Trois Pistoles, La Fin du Monde, all that. Maldit, which is fucking fantastic. All of those are really good, I think. But so John-Luc and Pierre Celis would sit down with me because they knew they were, both of them were in their 70s. And at the time. And so they'd sit down with me after work and have beers and just talk about anything, right? Which for a 22-year-old journeyman is, that doesn't get better than that, right? Yeah. And they weren't talking about, are we going to put guava in this IPA, right? Right. They were talking about fundamentals. So Pierre was talking about how, I don't remember exactly what the story was, but, he's working on a dairy. There was a battle in the Second World War, and his cows were shot, so he had all this equipment. That's why he started making wit beer. Oh, wow. It was a hyper-local style of beer, right? Yeah. And then he made Hoegaarden off of that, right? Who does that, right? That's insane, right? And then when he got bought out from Hoegaarden, he went to Texas for whatever reason. He goes to Austin and opens a Celis brewery and starts making 200,000 goddamn barrels a year out of that. Those stories are compelling to me, right? Mm-hmm. And how he got there is compelling to me too, right? And the beer he was making that got him there is compelling to me too, right? Mm-hmm. Is it 12% Imperial Stout? No. Right? Is it, strip the enamel off your teeth sour? No. Right? Is it a beer that 90% of people you give it to go, oh, that's pretty good? Yes.
Yeah.
There's something to that.
Yeah.
Right? And it's cool to do stunts and stuff, and we do it, Mm-hmm. But man, it's so much cooler. I think, I don't know. Beer's a drink of the people.
Yes, absolutely.
The more exclusive you make it, the less it's beer.
Mm-hmm.
Just philosophically,
Yeah.
So I think it's great that we're making New England IPAs, and I'll make them until I retire. They're fun to make. Mm-hmm. They are genuinely challenging, particularly the higher you get up in ABV. But like any style, there's a book of tricks, right? And once you know the book of tricks, you're kind of like, all right, well, what's next? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep.
And if what's next is, well, you put other shit in it to make it taste less like beer, I don't know if that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like compelling,
Yes. Yeah.
But to me, going back and, I mean, shit, man, I guess we're close to the same age.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long you've been into craft beer, but for me it was, obviously it was Michael Jackson and, Eckhart, you know what I mean? And guys like that who were writing about beer mm-hmm. in a way that was truly insightful and evocative.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. When you read the Michael Jackson, what's that, like the 100 Great Beers or whatever he's got?
Oh, Before You Die or something.
Yeah. I mean, go back and read that book, and the way he writes about beer is, here's the beer and here's what it tastes like. That's important. Mm-hmm. Here's the brewery, right? And here's the, maybe the brewmaster or the cellar guy, or I talked to somebody in the pub or whatever. And he was kind of driving it. What is I don't know how he did this as much as he drank, but what he was driving, it is impressive. Yeah. What he was driving at was, what is the soul of this beer? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that is still a part of young brewers coming up. Even those guys who don't get trained by old guys like I did, mm-hmm. or like I am now. Every generation of new brewers and every wave of craft beer makes us old guys nervous that that's getting lost, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what does beer become then? A gimmick? Right? You gotta freak out squares with everything you make? Mm-hmm. That's not good for beer, man.
Yeah.
It's not good for the industry. It's cool to be a rock star, man. It's cool to do cool tricks. And it's fun. But I don't know what it's doing to beer,
Yeah. So when you're at that point, how do you, like you said, next year you want to bring it full circle and hopefully people come along for the ride? Is that, kind of what you're in the thought process?
Well, you can't half-ass the release of a beer like that. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, you can't make functionally a hellless lager and not say, this is what we're doing and why, mm-hmm. right? And we're going to make a lot of it and we really believe in it. Because if you don't, nobody else will, mm-hmm. right? They're going to go, it tastes like Budweiser, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't,
right?
Right?
Yeah.
Any more than M43 tastes like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, right?
Yeah.
There's things to be respected about both beers, and they do have some similarities relative to other beers, I guess.
Sure.
But not really, right? Are we losing? That was everything. When I started doing this, man, craft beer was not cool, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, at all. Mm-hmm. It was a joke, honestly. Mm-hmm. And it hadn't made itself into a joke yet. It just was a joke, And, the guys I learned from were super proud of what they did. Mm-hmm. Really proud.
Right.
And really proud to, when we sat down with those guys back then, it wasn't conversation with brewers, right? It wasn't conversations about branding, right? It was almost a fun contest about how, I think it's like a lot of trades, how much do you know, right?
Sure.
Like, hey, I ran into this problem, what would you have done? Mm-hmm. And you knew particularly when you were a young guy, when an older guy was asking that, he was like, okay, Sonny, right? Like, I figured out this problem. What would you do, right?
Yeah.
And that was so great, right? You really got to learn. Mm-hmm. And they expected that you would know your shit, right? You didn't talk to brewers back then, and they didn't know the difference between diacetyl and pentanediol, right? Mm-hmm. Or, they didn't know Boyle's Law, right? I mean, really basic shit. And then it would go on from there, right? Counter pressure filling and double pre-evacuation and all kinds of interesting crap that you just get talking to people. And there still is that, right? There are a lot of great brewers working today, and I'm not saying there aren't.
Right.
I'm just saying the conversation has shifted, right?
Oh, sure. Well, that's what happens when 9,000 breweries open in the country.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
There's going to be many avenues, and it's not saying that any of them are wrong, not saying only one of them is right, but you know, it's what it is. And but the fundamentals still, I think, are important.
The fundamentals are crucial, man. And, you know, I think whenever you get a migration from however many professions to brewing, you know, I think it would be cool to be a brewer, and I've made home brew, right? So I'm going to take my retirement and open a brewery, right? Sometimes that works out great.
Yeah.
But my central idea about brewing is exclusively that it is a trade, right? Brewers are not better than plumbers or carpenters, and the work is not less hard, right? If you're doing it right. And like those other trades, you have to learn from somebody who's better than you. You have to. Not somebody that's better at writing recipes, although that is important. But that's what we have now, are these really not now, but you know, for the last 20 years, a lot of recipe-focused breweries, right? Not process-focused. And if you come from a German background or a Belgian background or an Old English background, recipes are important, but recipes are 2% of what you do, right? The rest of it is making consistent beer and putting it in the can over and over and over again, which is tedious. It's not sexy at all. But you need to know how to do that shit in order to do it right. And even if you do know how to do that shit, you're going to fuck it up every now and again.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know. So beers like, you know, lagers, you know, those are not about recipes. You know that, right? You're a home brewer. It's one malt, one hop, one yeast, go.
Yeah. It's precision.
It's precision, right?
Yeah.
It's all in the technique.
Yep.
All of it, right? And if you want a beer, I can pour you a Pilsner if you'd like to try it.
Sure.
Okay, let me grab you one. Which is, you know, a North German Pilsner, so a lot of, you know, bitterness and harder for folks to get their heads around. That's the beer I like.
Oh, that's good.
Thanks. Right? That's the beer I love to make.
Yeah.
Right? I love making that kind of beer. I like making New England IPAs. But I love that shit. And I mean, it's not just me, right? There are a lot of brewers that feel this way. And there are brewers that are out there doing it, right? Particularly in Colorado, West Coast for sure, a couple out east as well, who are committing themselves to making lagers. But it's a heavy, I feel like Sisyphus, you know what I mean? It's a heavy ball to roll uphill. Because it's hard to get people's attention because you have to sit down and talk to them about why that's good.
And what you guys have had to do. And marketing-wise, again, it comes to the marketing part.
Yeah, of course it always.
And it's the same thing. Like, how do you turn around and say, we've made New England IPAs for the past 4.5 years, 3.5 years.
Right.
This is what we think is even better.
Right. Well, I think the only thing you can do is tell the truth, right? Because again, they'll find out if you're bullshitting. You know, if you're bullshitting them. And the truth is, we put exactly as much care into the New England IPAs and the development of those IPAs as we put into that beer. But that beer means something different to beer than New England IPA does, right? And there's nothing wrong with brewing New England IPA. There's nothing wrong with drinking it. There's nothing wrong with being a huge fan of it, just like this. But the shape of it is different, right? And I have this conversation a lot. Actually, I'm going to take you to my office if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, and the market, you're talking two different people in a way.
Yeah, totally.
You know, that.
Well, yes and no.
But general populace.
Right. Well, I think we're talking about people who, you have to get people who are engaged in beer to listen to you talk about those.
Sure.
If I sit down with anyone somebody's uncle that lived in Williamson and start waxing poetic about Pilsner, they're gonna be like, shut the fuck up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We get it. But this is how I explain this. Forgive the mess.
Oh.
But I explain this way a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, this is New England IPA, the shape of it.
Uh-huh.
And this is a Pilsner, right? So, an ale is all things to support one aspect, right? Mm-hmm. And if you were to draw it out, this might be malt, this might be water, this big nebulous thing is hops, this might be acidity, these are, offshoots of bitterness and other supporting flavors that we're putting in there, right? Mm-hmm. But it's punk rock, it's all over the place, mm-hmm. right? It's made to kind of assault you, in a way, mm-hmm. right? This is lager, right? And you've got to hit somewhere in this target.
Sure.
And the only way you can really express yourself if you're making these technical lagers is to move your hit somewhere in here and keep it consistent, right?
Yeah.
Now, whether that's malt and hops or, water and malt or whatever it is, it's so much more, it takes so much more subtlety mm-hmm. to work inside that box. And for me, it is the difference between jazz or classical music and punk rock.
Sure.
Straight up.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with punk rock. It takes a lot to be able to play punk rock. And if you're a classical musician, you can't necessarily get that groove. It takes a while. Mm-hmm. Right? You can't mm-hmm. just do it. But at least if you're a classical musician, let's say, to push this forward a little bit, you have the technical skill, right? Your muscle memory is such that you could do this in relatively short order.
Sure.
Moving from here to there is a lot harder, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to make that story compelling, right? But that's essentially what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, what about the employees you have now?
Right.
How do you train them to become precision
brewers?
We've
always spoken to our employees in these terms.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So, for example, the acidity of New England IPA, the boys in here know the reason that's a particularly acidic beer, and it is, ours anyway, mm-hmm. is because from a food science perspective, your palate is tasting fruit, right? It's particularly tasting tropical and citrus fruit. Mm-hmm. It is really confusing for your palate to taste something and not have its level of acidity, whatever that is, with it, right? Mm-hmm. That's why, a lot of times people make lemon beer of one kind or another, shandy or whatever it is, mm-hmm. and folks will be like, oh man, that tastes like lemon pledge. Well, the reason is not because the lemon flavor isn't good. The reason is because there's not the accompanying acidity.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. You just solved the problem of the beer that I've been making for 5 years.
There you go. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Right? It's that easy.
Yeah.
Right? But if you don't know, you're probably not going to figure it out. Mm-hmm. Which is why you should talk to older brewers when you start.
Right. Right.
But those are the terms that we talk to our employees in, right? It's not rocket science, man. Mm-hmm. Any more than building a house is. Mm-hmm. Right? But opening up a brewery because you made some good homebrew is like opening up a contracting business because you made a doghouse that keeps water off your dog.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not that it's not cool that you made a cool doghouse.
Yeah.
But there's a fair gap in between that and building somebody a house that they're going to live in for the rest of their lives.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So I think that's kind of where we come from generally.
Okay. And yeah, that's a hard story to tell to someone in an elevator pitch.
Right.
At a bar or nowadays online.
Right, without saying shit that everybody says.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
We are for craft and tradition and hard work and accuracy. Right? Everybody says that. Quality, right?
Yes. Yes.
We're about quality.
Yeah.
Everybody's about quality.
Yeah.
Some people know how to get there and some don't. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. But everybody at the end of the day are about quality. So yeah, it's tough, man.
Don't forget, you can always check on brewermag.com. You can also see us on YouTube and listen to us on Spotify. And don't forget daily updates on Facebook, Instagram, and X. I'm Executive Editor Jon Sicotte for brewermagazine.com.